Bonjour, l'amour, j'adore, Tour Eiffel. Isn't it French a nice language to learn? Doesn't it sound beautiful? I guess many of you want to learn French, but maybe you're struggling with the grammar. What can you do about it? Hey everyone, my name is Jan van der Aa of Language Boots and I started learning French 3 years ago. And I have to admit, I have to be honest with you today here, I struggled with French grammar in the beginning, and actually now 3 years later, I would say my French is not that bad, but sometimes I still do struggle with the grammar. And you know, there are many things in French grammar that are different than from English or maybe your mother tongue. And as we mentioned in the last video, French grammar is not super complicated compared to grammar in, let's say, the Slavic languages or languages like Arabic. But still, if you're used to English, or maybe even for those who speak Spanish, although the two languages are pretty similar, there's still quite some tricky aspects here and there. Let me just give you a few examples. In French, for example, you have the subjunctive. Subjunctive. That basically, how does it work? If you want to say, for example, you have to drink, so il faut que, after this il faut que, after this que, in many cases in French you have to use the subjunctive. So il faut que tu bois becomes il faut que tu boives. Il faut que tu sais becomes il faut que tu saches. I have to go, il faut que j'y aille, not il faut que j'y vais. This can be pretty tricky for people who are learning French at the beginning, but also at a beginner level, some things can be tricky. While in Spanish, you just say no if you want to make a sentence negative. I don't want, yo no quiero. In French, you have to use ne, then you put the verb, and then you put pas in the end. Je ne veux pas. You know, so this ne pas, and then you have to put the verb in the middle. Can be a little bit tricky for beginners, but okay, this is just the beginning. It's just a very small aspect. Just one last example. French also say, like, if you want to say I don't have it or I don't have any, je n'en ai pas. So I not any have and then pas of ne pas. Okay, these were just a few examples which maybe you have been struggling with. Of course, you have more difficult structures like the conditional, which I've been practicing recently. And of course, you have the gender. You know, you have to know if something is important or importante, depending, or if it's masculine or feminine, the pronunciation of the adjective, and sometimes also the writing changes. So, lots of information for you, don't be overwhelmed. As any time and as always in language learning, you can learn things step by step, and that's what I did when I started learning French. Now, what's the best way for you to learn French grammar? Or maybe not just French grammar, but grammar in general if you're learning a foreign language. Well, I think there are two ways. One is the way for people who like grammar, and then there is another way for the people who don't like grammar. And actually, sorry for grammar lovers here, but I'm not a grammar fan. I want to be able to speak the language. I don't want to study the technical aspects of the language, how everything works. That's not my thing. But I know I have many friends, and I know that many of you here do actually like grammar. I would say if you love grammar, study the grammar. Buy grammar books, or read articles online on Wikipedia. There's lots of information about there on how grammar works. And if you like studying, then I'm sure that you can learn grammar that way. We should use approaches that we like. If you are a grammar fan, do it that way. Well, actually, up until now, I've been learning French for 3 years. I've never studied French grammar. Yet my grammar is, I think, okay, it's not that bad. Yes, I do still make mistakes. So how can you learn grammar without studying the grammar? It sounds a little bit strange, but actually you can learn grammar on the go. Let me give you a few examples. So, in the beginning when I started learning French, we did a lot of drills with my teachers. So when I learned how to say Je veux aller en France, and je veux aller en France, I want to go to France, I asked him, how do you make the sentence negative? And he said, ne, then you put the verb, and then you say pas. Je ne veux pas aller en France. Okay. And then he said, Jan, how do you say, I don't want to study French? And aha. Je ne veux pas. So I had to use the same structure all the time. These kind of exercises are called drills. And I think that I learned most of the grammar by drills. So this is something that you can do actively with a teacher. Then, of course, there is also another way to learn grammar, and that's by a lot of input. So basically reading a lot of French, listening a lot to the language, and after a while you start recognizing these patterns in the language, and you start adapting these in your own speech. As we always recommend here at Language Boost, we do like input. We do like to learn languages by lots of listening and reading, basically, but more at the advanced level, because we think that it's very important to start speaking as soon as possible, so you get this motivational boost, start liking the language, start adapting, implementing the language in your daily life, and learn in a more natural way. I will show you a few examples how I study my grammar actively with a teacher online. Basically with trial and error. Every time I make a mistake, he corrects me and he gives me a new drill, basically, so that I can try to use the same grammar but then in another sentence. And then, of course, by feedback, by getting feedback when you speak. So that's why I think it's so important to actually pay for a teacher who shows up at a certain time, at a certain date, who keeps you accountable and who can give you feedback. So normally when we do speaking practice, we do a lot of storytelling. So I tell him about a movie I've seen or a video I've watched or what I've done. And of course, when I speak French, I make mistakes. He gives me feedback. Jan, your grammar is not correct there. It should be whatever. And then immediately I start implementing. I start using the grammar that I just learned. I think that's a very powerful way to learn not only grammar but also vocabulary. You learn it on the go. You start using things directly after you get the feedback. That's a very good way to practice your brain to get used to these kind of grammar structures. So is it necessary to study grammar? Well, if you're a grammar fan, if you like grammar, do so. Is it necessary? No, I don't think so. I think you can learn grammar as you learn the language, as you make progress, but make sure that you have someone who gives you this feedback. And of course, make sure that once you reach the higher levels, you start focusing more on the inputs, you start listening to... I do a lot of French on Link. You can also watch, anything you want in French. And pay attention to the grammar, pay attention to grammar structures that the people use, Active listening, I will call that. That was it for today. I hope this video has been useful for you, and maybe you can not only apply these learning techniques in French, but also for other language that you are learning. That was it for now. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.